Welcome to our program, Ambassador Murray.
Thank you very much.
You left Uzbekistan in 2004 after working for 2 years as ambassador. Your ambassadorial career was probably the shortest, wasn't it?
It certainly was. It was supposed to be 3 years and it ended up as only 2.
Can you explain why?
Yes, I had fundamental disagreements with the British government over the nature of our relationship with the Uzbek government. In my opinion, we were being too uncritical of the Uzbek government, and we were downplaying questions of human rights and economic freedom in order to prioritize the security links, and particularly our alliance with the United States and the air base at Kashi-Khanabad. So that was the basic source of the dispute.
Do you still follow the news and events in Uzbekistan?
I certainly do. Of course, I still have many friends in Uzbekistan, and I still care a great deal about what happens to the country. So I follow events reasonably closely.
As you know, post-Soviet Uzbekistan will soon have its second president and its quarter-century history. And the most probable candidate to be the next leader became a prime minister when you were still in Uzbekistan in 2003. Did you know Shavkat Mirziyoyev?
Yes, I had several meetings with him in his capacity as Hakim of Samarkand at the time, but I met him a few times, so I know him reasonably well.
What did you think of him?
He's a hard man. He had a reputation of being involved in some of the more brutal enforcement actions of the regime, both while he was Hakim in Samarkand and earlier when he had been Hakim in Jizak. And he certainly was one of the, should I say, less Western members of the regime, one of the less well-traveled members of the regime. And I think even after his period of prime minister, he's somebody who's not very well-traveled and hasn't in particular seen a great deal of the West. And somebody, very much really from the old Soviet style of apparatchik. He wasn't one of the more modern or forward-looking members of the Uzbek elite.
Do you believe that people can change over time?
Oh, people do change over time. That's certainly true. And often people end up doing things which are quite surprising. Whether or not Mirziyoyev has changed is something we'll I guess see over the next year or two. But it would have to be, quite a spectacular change from his past record in order to make much difference. But it's certainly nothing in his past that would make you believe he was a reformer.
So then you might have heard of some changes occurring in Uzbekistan under the leadership of the acting president. Some of these changes might not have been possible under late Islam Karimov. Do you believe that Uzbekistan is on the threshold of positive developments?
Well, I certainly hope so. Whether I believe so is a different question. I mean, I think one thing which is positive is moves, for example, to improve relationships with Uzbekistan's neighbors, and particularly Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, where there have been disputes over water resources and energy and other disputes over the years, which have rather built up. And I think Karimov tended to take those things very personally. And Karimov now having gone, there is an opportunity to improve regional relationships. And there I see some quite good signs that Mirziyoyev is going to be more outward looking in that respect, and probably able to forget some of these rather overblown disputes in the past. So on the international relations side, I see some increased possibilities for regional cooperation, and that is a good thing. Internally, there's not much sign of real reform yet. There are a few indications that some reforms will be forthcoming, but none of it looks very fundamental. and in particular, we have a presidential election which is coming up shortly, but none of the real opposition is allowed to contest. You have four candidates from parties which, exactly in the style of the old Soviet Union, are actually really all part of the same group. I mean, all the people who are allowed to contest are people from within the government structures, who were all supporters of Karimov. And the genuine opposition parties, and you can include Irk and Berlik and the Sunshine Coalition and various others, including several leaders who are in exile, in fact, in Washington, where you are, they are not allowed to contest the election. So, there's little sign of that anything has fundamentally changed.
Well, I guess you can get all the changes, all the positive changes in such a short time, right?
No, that's true. And as I say, really, we need to give it maybe 2 years before we come to a firm judgment on whether this is really a dawn of opportunity for reform, or whether things are carrying on much the same as ever. And we will see. But the signs of real change which are needed, for example, privatization in the economy, particularly in the agricultural sector, and an end to over-reliance on cotton crop in agriculture, an end to forced labor in the cotton industry, those kind of things. There's really not much sign of that happening at all at the moment.
Did you make any friends in the Uzbek government while you were there?
Oh, very much so. I mean, it's quite possible to get on quite well on a personal level with people with whom you disagree politically on some things. And people as well are, all of us, we are subject to the culture in which we grew up, to our education, to our knowledge of the world, and those inform the decisions we make in life. So there are many people who are very good, very nice people working in the Uzbek government and within the Uzbek administration. And either they haven't had the chance to put the kind of reforms they want to put in place, and there are plenty of people within Uzbek ministries, including even some Uzbek ministers, who do understand the kind of reforms that are needed in Uzbekistan and who do have quite a Western outlook. But they don't necessarily get the chance to advocate those or put them into operation. But no, there are. It would be completely wrong to say that everybody who works within the Uzbek government is a bad person. That's not true at all. There are some very decent people there, and there are people there who I got on very well with on the personal level, and there are people there, including ministers, with whom I am still in contact. But I'm not going to say who they are, because that might get them into trouble.
You were an adamant defender of human rights and one of the vocal critics of the Karimov government, despite your diplomatic status. And that was a reason, as you state, why the government of the United Kingdom recalled you. After 12 years, do you still believe you did the right thing at the time, or do you have certain regrets?
No, I don't really have any regrets. And I should say it wasn't merely a question of the human rights situation in Uzbekistan. The particular issue which concerned me so much was the prevalence of torture in Uzbek prisons, and the fact that the United Kingdom intelligence services were passing on to the American and British intelligence services information which had been obtained under torture. So Britain was, if you like, complicit in the torture because we were knowingly receiving intelligence material from it. And very often it was wrong. I mean, it was almost always wrong because the purpose of the torture was to get people to confess to membership of Al-Qaeda. And in almost all the cases, the people who were forced to confess to membership of Al-Qaeda were nothing to do with Al-Qaeda at all. It was completely false. It was simply that the government wished to portray all its opposition as Al-Qaeda. But as I said, it was wider than Uzbekistan because the CIA was flying people into Uzbekistan in order to torture them or have them tortured outside American jurisdiction as part of the extraordinary rendition program, just as it was also doing in many other countries, including Syria, Tunisia, Egypt, various other countries, particularly in the Middle East. The extraordinary rendition program was very well dissected and exposed eventually in Washington by the Senate there. So that whole international system was something which I disagreed with. And I also disagreed with my government over the war in Iraq. I thought the invasion of Iraq was a terrible mistake by the British and American government. So my falling out with my government wasn't only about the human rights situation in Uzbekistan. It was about that, but it was also about these much wider issues. So do I regret it? No, I think, if you like, I think history has proven that I was right on these matters, and on the war in Iraq in particular, and on extraordinary rendition, which has been stopped and been widely condemned. So no, I think I probably would do the same again. Do I miss not being an ambassador? Of course I miss not being an ambassador. It was a very nice lifestyle. You get to live in a palace and have servants and drive around in a Range Rover with a driver to take you, and live a very high lifestyle, and you get paid an awful lot of money. So on a personal level, I guess I miss those aspects of the job, and I miss being involved in diplomatic negotiation, which was a very interesting career to have. But would I do the same again? Yes, I would do the same again. So I don't really regret my decision at all.
Do you have any indication or perhaps information from your contacts in the Uzbek government that the torture practices are still continuing?
I think there's no doubt at all that the torture practices are still continuing. Uzbekistan has a real problem with its justice system, and I think every Uzbek knows this is true. If you are arrested for something and the state charges you, you have still today a 99% chance of being convicted. There's no genuine independent court or judge. If the state says you are guilty, the judge will find you guilty. And that's just statistically true. As a matter of fact, 99% of all cases arrive in a guilty verdict. And more often than not, you'll be tortured or beaten until you confess. And that's the basis on which large majority of judgments are reached, which is confession. And it's not, yes, it always happens in political cases where political detainees are always beaten and tortured until they confess to terrorist links or other such nonsense. But it's wider than that. If you are arrested for anything in Uzbekistan, the police are going to beat you up until you confess to whatever they want you to confess for. And the absence of any proper policing and of any proper system of justice in Uzbekistan is a terrible problem.
Do you miss Uzbekistan? And if so, what do you miss about Uzbekistan?
Well, I miss Uzbekistan enormously. I've never had such an enjoyable time as the couple of years I had in Uzbekistan, political problems aside. The people are fantastically hospitable. What I used to love was I used to travel, all around the country and then call on local people and try and learn something about them and their culture. And the hospitality is amazing. As you know, the even people who don't have much money, if you call on them as a stranger, they will put themselves in debt to put the most amazing dinner before you, so the guest has everything they want. They will serve you fantastic food and drink, and you'll have such an enjoyable time talking, discussing everything. Other people will come around to see who's come and chat. I had so many wonderful experiences with Uzbek people of that kind. And that, of course, is without also talking of the architecture and the history. I'm a historian myself, so that aspect of it was fascinating for me. The tremendous Islamic civilization, tremendous tradition of Islamic civilization, of poetry, of architecture, all of that I miss, and I miss the food. Yes, I enormously miss Uzbekistan, and I do look forward to the time when political changes will come sufficient to enable me to go back again and see my friends again.
Do you find it a coincidence that in the last few weeks we've had Brexit, the election of pro-Russian presidents in Moldova, Bulgaria, Trump in the US who wants to improve relations with Putin? Does that mean that people are tired of Western standards of modern liberalization and want to go back to traditional values? I know you're a proponent of the independence of Scotland from UK for that matter.
Yes, one thing which undoubtedly has happened in the West in the last 2 or 3 decades, since the early 1980s, there has been a massive increase in the gap between the rich and the poor. The wealth gap has grown enormously. Far fewer people have good, steady, well-paying, safe jobs. And the rich are getting richer. The billionaire class is getting larger and larger, and while welfare systems are being eroded, and so people who are too ill or sick or old to work are seeing their standards of living eroded. And those people in employment have fewer and fewer rights at work, have less good pay. Really, there's been this tremendous alienation from society by ordinary people in the West because they're seeing the smaller and smaller class of the ultra wealthy take all the money while the rest of society is struggling. And there's no doubt at all that is what has led to Brexit, the vote to leave the European Union here. That's what has led to the election of Donald Trump in the United States. And I think those two are very linked because in both of those cases, both Brexit and Donald Trump benefited from something of a racist rhetoric. Trump's attacks on Muslims and Mexicans, and here in the UK, the Brexit campaign was led with comments on immigrants, which were disgusting, which were really very nasty anti-immigrant comments of a kind that shouldn't be any part of normal political discourse. So what happened with both the Trump and the Brexit cases is that people who are right-wing, if you like, were able to take the anger people feel at growing wealth inequality, but to instead turn that anger, instead of turning that anger against the rich, divert it against immigrants and divert it to the causes of racism. And that's a very sad phenomenon, that the reaction to growing inequality is an attack on one of the poorest groups and groups which is having difficulty making its way, which is immigrant groups, and particularly Muslim immigrant groups. So that's a worrying aspect. There's a positive aspect which you mentioned, which is that undoubtedly what Donald Trump has been saying about relationships with Russia was very much more healthy than what Hillary Clinton was saying. I found some of the things which Hillary Clinton was saying about Russia quite astonishing. It was as though she was wanting to try to start a war with Russia. All these ideas of enforcing no-fly zones against the Russians in Syria, of possibly attacking Iran, as Hillary Clinton said. She appeared to be very keen on confrontation with Russia. The West should be avoiding confrontation with Russia. We should be looking for cooperation with Russia. And on that particular aspect, I do think that Donald Trump has a much healthier attitude. He appears to be less of an instinctive warmonger than Hillary Clinton.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for your interview and being on our program.
Thank you very much. It's been very good to talk to you.